Welcome learners. Today we are going to deal with one of the important topics in organizational processes. In organizational processes, earlier you would have learnt about the communication processes which play an important role, and the leader and the decision making processes which play a significant role in the organization. Today we are going to discuss about power dynamics, how power plays an important role in the organization. Any organization for that matter can run only with power. Without power, organization cannot reach their goals and achieve their targets. So power plays a very important role in the organization. When we think of power or when we know about power, power is a kind of the work which is vested on in one person or different persons. When we discuss about power, power is distributed in the organization from top to down. Power sometimes is centralized in certain aspects. Power is vested in one person or centralized. In certain other aspects in the organization, power is distributed to different people in the organization. In recent organizations, you would have seen the power is distributed among the employees in the organization so that they are empowered to carry out the tasks which are necessary for the organization. So they are trained, they are molded to complete those tasks, they are given resources to complete those tasks, so they are empowered to carry out those work aspects. Now, know what aspects to be covered in power dynamics. Initially, let us learn what is the concept of power in the organization. Later, we will be knowing about differentiating power from authority and influence, and what are the sources of power which exist in the organization, what are the bases of power, and ultimately the dynamics of power in the organization. So let us go one by one and learn what exactly power and how power plays an important role in the organization. When we discuss about power, Robbins, he defines power as the ability to influence and control anything that is of value to others. How does power play an important role in the organization? Unless the person is having the capacity, the person is not able to influence or control anything that is of value to others. For example, in an organization, the head of the organization should have the ability, because he is knowledgeable or she is knowledgeable, they have expertise about the aspects which have to be covered in the organization, that particular organization. Only then power will be able to influence. By power, you will be able to influence and control also what is beneficial to the organization. Only then it plays an important role and adds value to others. Only then the people or the employees of that particular organization get influenced by the leader or the CEO of the organization to carry out their task, carry out their targets, reach their goals, achieve the goals of the organization. So let us now understand how power plays an important role in the organization. What exactly power is about in the organization. For example, power refers to a capacity that A has to influence the behavior of B so that B acts in accordance with A's wishes. So A, for example, is the CEO of the organization, and A has the power because of his role in the organization, and his role is defined that the person has to achieve these are the targets of the organization. He or she knows very well that these are the targets of the organization and with whom he can achieve these targets or goals in the organization. So the person influences the behavior of B because B has the expertise to carry out the task, and so that the targets and goals of the organizations can be achieved. So because of the influence, because of the power vested in A, B carries out those tasks. So, power in all probability is nothing but securing obedience. This is how Weber defines. Weber defines power as the probability of securing obedience. The management issues the orders and the employees carries out those tasks. So, they have to obey those orders. Only then they will be able to continue in the organization. But covertly, employees also can resist, but they will not be able to resist for a longer time because their position will become very insecure if they do not obey the orders. So, they have to obey the orders, only then they will be able to sustain in the organization. Power is A influences power and B carries out the task. What is counter power? Counter power is the capacity of a person or a team or organization to keep a more powerful person or group in exchange relationship. For example, earlier you have seen A issues the order and B carries out that. But because B has the ability, he is able to influence A. Because B has knowledge, B has expertise, he or she is able to carry out the task and influence A. So, there is power at the higher level and there is counter power at the other side. So, that is how power and counter power play important role in an organization. So, you can look at from this figure how person A with his ability is able to influence person B to carry out the task in the organization. Similarly, the person B has the expertise, the knowledge to carry out the task. So, the person A and person B are dependent on each other in order to reach the goals of the organization. Person A's goals also is achieved. Similarly, person B's goals are also achieved. The goals of the organizations are achieved with the influence of power and counter power. Then look at this figure, how dependence is built up in the power relationship. Power, for example, if you look at power as such, has power to control the goals of subordinate, and counter power has counter power to control the superior's goal. For example, when you look at power of the head of the organization, the top management of the organization, they have the power to control the goals of subordinates. They instruct the subordinates, they place the orders that these are the targets which has to be achieved. When subordinates carry out those tasks, the targets, the goals, they in turn are benefited, for example, promotions. Otherwise, their promotions will be withheld if they do not carry out or obey those tasks, obey those orders. Similarly, counter power is unless the subordinates carry out the task given by the superiors, they will not be able to reach the targets. But by carrying out those tasks, what happens? The productivity of the organization increases, which is what the superior wants from his or her subordinates. So, both are dependent on each other. For example, you take the marketing, a service organization or a manufacturing organization, where you have to assemble the products and then deliver it to the customers. So, the customers are in direct contact with the marketing people, and the marketing manager reports to the higher authorities in the organization. So, the customers are dependent on the marketing manager is dependent on the superior, because the superior provides the material and financial resources to the marketing managers to reach those targets and goals of the organization. So, everything is related. Unless the subordinates perform, the superior is not able to show the output in the organization. Unless the superior directs or defines the goals of the organization, the subordinates are not able to carry out those tasks. So, both are dependent on each other. Power rests both on the top management as well as on the employees of the organization to reach the goals of the organization. So, both are dependent on each other. For example, you can look at a model of power which exists in the organization. There are different sources of power which exist in the organization, like legitimate power, reward power, coercive power, expert power and referent power, which we will deal in due course. Similarly, there are contingencies of power: substitutability, centrality, discretion power, visibility. All these relates to power of the others. So, this is a model of power which exists in general within organizations. Now, let us go and discuss and differentiate power from authority and influence. Generally, people get confused power with authority and influence. Power is the capacity to influence other, because the power, whatever power I have, because of my expertise, because of my knowledge and because I am placed in such a position, I am able to influence others to carry out the targets within the organization. When a control system is legitimized, power becomes authority. Power is nothing but, authority is nothing but legitimized power, because I am sitting in that particular position and my role is defined and I know what I have to carry out. This has been given to me by the organization. It is defined that I have to perform this role and perform these tasks. So, when it is defined and given to me, it becomes legitimized power and nobody can deny then. So, similarly, subordinates have to perform, because subordinates' role is also defined in the organization, what exactly they have to do. They have to take instructions from their superiors, they have to understand how those targets have to be achieved and what are the resources. Resources are provided to them. So, they have to utilize those resources and come out with the product in the organization. So, the power vested in that particular person, when it is defined, the role is defined, the tasks are defined, the targets are mentioned, then it becomes legitimized. When the power is legitimized, it is called as authority. So, authority is institutionalized power. So, power is the capacity to influence others, authority is institutionalized power. With the institutionalized power, the person who has been authorized to carry out those tasks will be in a position to take work from others. Influence implies persuasion. Influence, we can say, it is something like leadership. The leader is able to influence the employees to carry out those necessary tasks by which the organization can sustain or continue. So, the leader is able to influence and persuade to carry out those aspects in the organization or the task which has to be carried out in the organization. So, influence is more closely associated with leadership than power. So, a leader has to influence the organization, that the reasons for that such an organization is existing and the employees have to carry out those tasks or the goals or the targets of the organization so that the organization sustains. Otherwise, what happens? The organization will not be able to continue in future. So, we are able to know the difference between power, authority and influence. Power as it is the capacity, and when power is legitimized, it becomes authority. And influence is a quality of a leader to influence the people or the employees of the organization, so that the employees are motivated to perform and achieve the goals of the organization. What are the different sources of power which exist in an organization? Let us look at the interpersonal sources of power. What are the interpersonal sources of power which exist in an organization? Reward power, coercive power, legitimate power, expert power and referent power. Let us look at each of these power sources and how do they play an important role in the organization. Apart from interpersonal sources of power, we also have structural sources of power. Knowledge as power, resources as power, decision making as power and network as power. So, let us look at each of these concepts which exist in an organization. What is a reward power? Reward power is a compliance achieved based on the ability to distribute rewards that others view as valuable. So, this means it is a kind of positive reinforcement to the employees who are able to complete the tasks and thereby achieve the goals of the organization. When the employees do that kind of activity, then the person is rewarded either monetarily or non-monetarily. Generally, when you are working in an organization, you will be able to know that you complete a given task, then in your appraisal you mention that, and it is looked at by the superior of the organization, and then thereby you are rewarded by moving you to the next level, or you are being given a recognition certificate, or you are being given an award by performing in an award ceremony, or it has been pasted in the organization home page that these are the people who have achieved their targets before the deadline and they are being rewarded. So, the reward can be either monetary or non-monetary. It can be non-monetary also. Reward is nothing, it is but a positive reinforcement to the employees, so that they are motivated to perform and continue to perform in the organization. Then the next power is legitimate power. What does legitimate power in an organization mean? Legitimate power is the power a person receives as a result of his or her position in the formal hierarchy of an organization. For example, a HR manager. What is the power vested in an HR manager? HR manager has to think of the organization, think of the employees as a whole, and he has to provide an organizational structure, he has to define the organizational structure, the levels of an organization, the roles of an organization, and also has to define what exactly an employee has to perform from lower management to the top management. So, all these powers are vested in HR manager, and then thereby the HR manager defines, because of the power being given by the organization to him or her, that he is able to use that and perform his role. So, that is called as legitimate power. Then we go to other sources of power, which is called as coercive power. This is a power which is based or that is dependent on fear. Coercive power is nothing but a kind of punishment. We discussed about reward power. By performing, the employees are able to go to the next level in terms of promotion or in terms of increase in their salary, or the recognition is given by the organization, award is given by the organization. Similarly, coercive power is also negative reinforcement, whereas reward power is a positive reinforcement, coercive power is a negative reinforcement. So, in an organization, there might be certain employees who are unable to carry out their task, who may not have the expertise or knowledge to carry out those tasks, or in spite of having all the knowledge, the expertise, they are unable to complete those tasks within the time or unable to perform. Then there are several ways, because the manager has the power to motivate them in terms of helping them out, counseling them, and then getting the task done. When this is also not possible, when this also is not helping the employee to perform, then the manager uses coercive power by putting down that they are not able to achieve the targets, they are not able to perform, they do not have expertise to carry out that, or not in a position to understand and also to learn. They do not have that ability to learn also. Then the person is demoted or his increment is decreased. So, these are the ways by which the manager is able to use coercive power, because coercive power is given to the manager to use in terms of need. So, generally if you look at an organization, they rarely use coercive power, because they always want to help out the employees. If the employees are not able to perform, the employees are trained, they are given training to perform that, they are given help, they are asked to look at a mentor or a counselor so that they learn how to go about in the organization. It is very rarely you will be able to see that coercive power is being used in the organization. Then we look at the other aspect in the power, which is expert power. What is expert power? Expert power is, the power is based on special skills or knowledge. You have expertise in that particular aspect, you have knowledge relating to that aspect, then you are able to help out with that by performing you are able to achieve the goals of the organization. Because you have expertise and the knowledge relating to that particular task, you are able to carry out that task in a very efficient manner. So, expert power is nothing but the skills and the knowledge is there in that particular individual or a team, which is called as expert power. Expert power plays a very important role in the organization, because organization depends on the expertise and the knowledge, and those people who have expertise and knowledge, they play a very important role in the organization. So, the power is being vested in them because of their ability, their skills and their knowledge. So, the organization depends on those type of individuals, and thereby they feel more powerful. Then let us look at the other aspect of the power, interpersonal sources of power, which is called as referent power. What exactly is referent power is about? This is a power based on possession by an individual of a desirable resources or personal traits. I or you, any one of us can use this kind of power. We can always say that we are very close to the head of the organization and thereby use the head of the organization name often and get the work done. This can be used in a very desirable manner also. We always refer the name of the head of the department or head of the organization and get the task done. So, referent power generally has to be used in a positive way. But what happens in an organization, some of the individuals, they may use this referent power in a negative way. If you use it in a positive way, then you will be able to achieve the goals of the organization in a smooth and efficient manner. But if you continue to use your referent power, then the importance of referent power diminishes. So, referent power has to be used sometimes, not all the times, so that you are able to achieve the desirable results. So far we were discussing about different interpersonal sources of power which exist in the organization. Now, we look at each of these sources of power and what are the consequences of these kinds of power on others in the organization. When we were discussing about coercive power, we have learnt that it is very rarely used by managers in the organization, because generally the managers in the organization, they would like to work on this, help the employees to learn, train them, give them resources. Only when the employees resist for a longer period, then the managers use coercive power to sustain it, to stop that. So, what happens when you use coercive power? It is resisted by the employees and they use counter power. So, without employees, the managers are unable to complete the tasks, the targets given to them. So, they use their counter power, employees, and they do not perform. So, coercive power very cautiously to be used. It has to be used very, very cautiously in the organization, because it can be resisted by the employees by using counter power. So, use of counter powers plays here when you do not use coercive power cautiously. So, when you use coercive power, it also reduces the trust between the parties. So, the employees no longer trust the manager of the organization, unless it is used very rarely only on certain employees, that too when the opportunities are given to the employees to help them so that they are able to perform. Even if the help is given and the employees are unable to perform, only then you should use coercive power. Otherwise, it reduces the trust between the parties. And by using coercive power, you are also decreasing employees' satisfaction in an organization. So, employees will be dissatisfied. The more and more you use different methods of coercive power, it reduces the trust and then it reduces their output, and thereby they are dissatisfied with their job. And they do not get influenced by the manager in a positive manner, rather they get influenced unwillingly, because if they do not perform, they are demoted or they will not be given any rise in the salary. So, you have to use the coercive power unless it is required in the organization or on the particular employees. Influence until other party acquires balancing power. So, you use coercive power to influence the employee to perform, and when you go on doing that for positive aspects of the organization, then the employee may get influenced by that and then starts performing. Then we will look at the other aspect of reward power, how reward power can be used and what is the consequences of that power in the organization. Reward power tend to produce compliance, because by performing and completing a particular task, you are moving to the next level or you are being appreciated by your manager. So, it tends to produce compliance among the employees. And reward power works only during short run. If you go on rewarding the person or the persons whenever they complete a certain targets or a product, then it will not play any kind of influence on them to perform well again, because they know automatically carrying out the routine tasks help them to achieve the targets, and thereby they are being rewarded. So, reward power has to be used cautiously also, like coercive power, only when some kind of innovation has taken place or some kind of targets are met, when they have formed certain deadlines, but before the deadlines you are able to achieve that by using your own ability and expertise, and you are able to complete that particular task. Then it plays an important role. Otherwise, for the routine task, if you reward, that will not help the employees in any way in the long run. And so, reward power influences only for a special issue, but not create enthusiasm among the employees. So, very cautiously reward power also has to be used on certain occasions like innovation, meeting the targets before the deadlines, and creating some kind of a product or some kind of service which was not visualized by the organization. Only then you will be able to use the reward power. If you use that particular power only on certain aspects, then it plays an important role and motivates the employees to perform better. Let us go to the next power, that is legitimate power. How legitimate power helps people of the organization, and what are the consequences if you use legitimate power in the organization? By having authority, by having the definition or the role given by the organization in your tasks, we are able to produce compliance with subsistence. You order and the subordinates perform. It works in accordance with job description and organizational rules, and it influences direct based. You order and the employees obey those orders. By having legitimate power in that particular level or in that particular role, you are able to get your things done. What is the consequence of an expert power in an organization? Expert power helps, the consequence of the power is employee commitment. By having expertise and knowledge to achieve the targets or the goals of the organization, you are able to help the organization to do better. So, then you are committed, the employee commitment is increased. You are able to help the organization, the employee feels that I have become important for the organization because of my ability and because of my skills and because of the knowledge which is there, I am able to help the organization. So, by possessing expertise, you are increasing the commitment of the employees to the organization. And it also develops enthusiasm in subordinates. So, when organization recognize the importance of expertise, the skills, the knowledge, then the commitment of the employees increases, and it also creates an enthusiasm for their growth and for their development in subordinates. Then we go to the referent power. What exactly is referent power is about? We discussed earlier. By using this power, you are able to commit the employees, you are able to motivate the employees to perform better. It also develops enthusiasm in subordinates and also exerts employee resources more than expected. So, referent power should be used in a positive manner by saying that if you complete these targets within the deadline, then I will be able to influence the head of the organization for you to get raise in the salary or for you to get promoted to the next level. So, this has to be used in a positive way. Only then this will help the employees to perform better. So far we have learned what exactly power is in organization, how power plays important role in the organization, and how counter power also exists in the organization, what are the different sources of power in the organization, how they influence the subordinates to perform in the organization, and how and when the different sources of power have to be used in the organization we have learned in this particular session.